Welcome back. So today we're going to be going over lesson 2.3 in our geometry course, which is drawing conclusions. If you haven't watched my previous lesson, I highly recommend you do so. But again, I don't want to waste any more of your time, so let's get right into it. So this lesson, my goal is for it to be pretty short, right? And just a reminder of how to approach proofs and like drawing conclusions, right? Um, And the reason I'm going over this now is because our next lessons, right, and especially Unit 3, it's going to have like big, giant, complex proofs, right, with like 14 and 15 steps. So, again, good to know, um, just as a reminder. So, what's the general procedure for drawing conclusions? Well, first of all, what do I mean by drawing conclusions? Well, essentially, I'm talking about like what steps you should take to get to your final step, right? So like you're proving what the statement that you're trying to prove, right? So the first thing, right, is you have to memorize theorems, right? I've been telling you this for the past like several videos, right? Make sure you know the theorems, right? That's like the first thing you can do to help maximize your potential for being able to complete proofs, right? So just memorizing theorems, definitions, and like postulates, right? Which of course I will cover in these lessons. Then, right, after you've embedded those into your head, the next step is to look for keywords in the problem, right? So by keywords, I mean like look for things you have learned in the past, right? Like for those definition words like bisectors and midpoints, um, congruency, right? So again, right, analyze what you're given. The next step is now to take those keywords that you see in the problem, right, and associate them with theorems that you know. So like again, think of all the um, theorems and like definitions you have learned that involve or are related to those keywords, right? Like it doesn't make sense to think of um, right angle congruency if you're given like bisectors and midpoints, right? So again, think of only the theorems that associate with those keywords. Then after that, narrow down to a single theorem that you can use, right, given the information that you have. So decide which theorem or like, postulate allows you to draw a conclusion, right? So yeah, again, after you associate those keywords with some properties or some theorems, narrow down to one option, right? And that's usually easy to do if you know what you're doing. And then finally, of course, you would write that theorem down, right, draw a conclusion. So let's look at an example which kind of applies this process. And also, by the way, I want to mention earlier in I think 1.4 we were beginning proofs, and I mentioned a five-step process. Please still to stick to that, right? This is just like a reminder, right? Like a different approach you could take, but I think both of these are really good approaches to have. Okay, so in this example, we're given um, AB bisects angle CAD, right? So again, they give us a diagram, and this time it's actually different because it doesn't tell us what the conclusion is. Like we have to find that out ourselves. So let's look at our first step, right? Memorizing theorems. So we've already done that, right? So assuming you guys have actually done that, let's move on to the next step, which is looking for keywords. What keywords do you see in the given information here? The first thing that pops up in my head is bisects, right? Because that's literally all we're given, right? AB bisects angle CAD. So I'm assuming bisects has to be an important part of this question here. And now finally, or actually not finally, but like your third step is to think of all the theorems involving that keyword. So of course, if you're thinking about bisects, and you're actually given an angle in this problem, right? So you should narrow down your options to like, bisector theorems or like angle bisector theorems, right? Again, only because you know there's a bisects in the problem and there's also an angle involved, right? So think of angle bisector. And then after that, you have to decide which theorem actually works. So, of course, to do that, you have to start the proof itself. So, our first statement here, right, remember with that 5 step process I told you about in 1.4 is to write your givens down. So, of course, you write AB bisects angle CAD, right? Second, um, what can you say, right? You know it bisects angle CAD. In that case, you can use an angle bisector theorem, right? And if you don't remember what that is, again, watch that specific video. Um, and the statement you can make is, well, of course, angle bisectors, right? Like if an ray bisects an angle, um, the result is two congruent angles, right? So that's the conclusion we can logically make. So we've done that part, right? We've drawn that conclusion, which is that these two angles, right, angle CAB and angle DAB, right, are congruent to each other. And of course, you write the theorem, which you already know by now, right? Um, because you've done the previous steps, angle bisector. So again, that was a pretty short recap of how you should approach these questions. Um, the most important part, right? Memorize your theorems, because after that it becomes much easier. You know what to expect. So hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comments, right? Just about proofs in general, and I'll try my best to answer all of them. And I'll see you next time.